in these homilies, I always swing for the fences. So if I'm packing a lot in, it's because I really want to make the most of it. Because if we're on a team, we want to win. There's no point in losing if you're going to go through the trouble and being on a team. And so when I look at these readings, there's a team and a coach and victory, and all these things are coming together. And maybe here's how to start. For many years, a good team that I like to follow, the Buffalo Bills, was really terrible because they had poor coaching. They didn't seem to have a cohesive team, and yeah, the talent was bad too. So if we're going to then do what the Bills did, is really improve, we need a lot of things. We need to practice. This is our faith too. We have to practice our faith. We need to then have good coaching, not only at the head coach level, but the assistant coaches, and then they work together so that their teamwork on a coaching level is blessing, or you might say affecting, the players' teamwork. And maybe you didn't realize it, but if you're baptized, you are on God's team. That's sort of the theme of our first reading. Joshua has been the coach, you might say, of the people. Moses died. Moses led them out of slavery in Egypt. This is the Old Testament. And Joshua took over when Moses died. Now this is the end of the book of Joshua, and he is saying to the people, actually a quick detail that I'm going to forget to say later. Joshua's name in Hebrew is Yeshua, God saves. That's the same word, Jesus, God saves. Yeshua is Jesus in Hebrew. So it's almost like the Old Testament Jesus is being prefigured here by, we'll later see the New Testament, the real Jesus. But he says to them, this is again, this leader says to his team, who are you going to follow? What team are you going to be on? You could pick any of these pagan gods and follow them. Or you can follow the one true God. And here are his commandments. This is what it takes to be on God's team, the true and living God. And that was pretty challenging. And yet he says, he gives an example, me and my household, we will serve the Lord. What are you going to do? And they actually respond. They will try to be on his team. They say, yes, we're going to follow his commandments. We're going to do it. We're going to win together. And if you know the Old Testament, well, they don't always do the best. They struggle. God is patient with us because it's hard. We have to practice our faith. You would practice a sport, and that involves lots of failure. Sometimes I think with the church or our faith, we take a different tact. We think, well, if it's too hard or I can't be perfect, I'll just quit because I have other things to do. And yet, in those other things, like a sports team, we would try really hard. And we would listen to our coaches, and we would learn from our failures, and we would put the time in. And I think because we see on an earthly level, it's fun, and we have goals that we can meet, and we can do that together. My hope is that as a church, we can do these things of faith with just as much coaching, just as much fun, and just as much teamwork. Now, Jesus says the same sort of thing. The detail that I asked you to read in that reading was this first line, that they were saying, this teaching, Jesus, is too hard, we're going to leave now. But you don't really get what that teaching was, because last Sunday was a special holy day, the solemnity of the Assumption. So all our readings were about Mary. But if we had heard the regular reading, this is about the 50th verse of chapter 6 of John's Gospel. The hard teaching was this. Jesus, the coach, the true coach, says to them, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life within you. And even in the Greek, it's the word munch. It's a very in-your-face sort of coaching move. Now, a couple of weeks ago, if you were here, you heard me make this distinction between the local head-to-toe presence of Jesus, which is ascended and glorified in heaven, and then his sacramental presence, his presence here in Holy Communion, which is really Jesus and not bread, and really Jesus and not wine. But if we don't understand this, and maybe his disciples didn't understand that, we would think, well, that's so gross. Or a Jewish person would say, I won't break the law and touch a human corpse if that's what you're wanting me to eat. And Jewish people are really particular about blood. Their meat is, they get the blood out of it before they eat it. That's against the law in the Mosaic law. Jesus, though, is this coach who is challenging them. I don't know, it's kind of out of date nowadays, but in the old school, you'd have coaches that would get right in your face And we don't want to abuse people, no, but this was a motivating tactic. And Jesus is kind of doing that. I think sometimes we make Jesus far too wimpy, and maybe that's why we don't want to be on his team. But anyways, he says, where are you going to go? Are you just going to leave too? And Peter and the apostles say to him, we can't go. You are the leader that we've been looking for. You are the Messiah. And so, even though it's tough, they will follow him. I mentioned before practicing our faith. At a very basic level, there are 5 precepts of the church, and 2 of them I want to speak about very, very briefly. These are the first 2 precepts of the church. And the first one, is come to Mass every Sunday and every holy day of obligation. Last week, we got kind of a double whammy. That Sunday was a holy day of obligation. But the next holy day of obligation is the 8th of December, Immaculate Conception. But in between them, every Sunday is a little Easter, Saturday night as well. There's also a 5 p.m. Mass at St. Jude's if you're traveling or you've been on vacation or you have another commitment. That's a Sunday, 5 p.m., by the way. But this is really important, because if we're not having this weekly contact, this weekly practice, reception of God's grace, how can we do anything? I'll put it another way, how can we be on God's team if we're not showing up, if we're not worshiping him here together? Slowly but surely, we're going to worship other things. And the phones are always vying for our worship. Let us not worship them, or any screen. The second precept of the church is really, really beautiful. And that is reconciliation or confession. It is asked of us as Catholic Christians to go once a year to the sacrament of reconciliation if we've committed a grave sin. And a grave sin, or let's just say a mortal sin, will be a serious matter that we know is really wrong, and we do it anyways. That's sort of the condensed version. Now, we may not think that coming to Mass is a serious matter, or missing Mass would then be serious, but it is. And our bishops, with coronavirus, it all got messed up because there wasn't even Mass for a while. It probably became a very low priority in our lives, perhaps. But since the 5th and 6th of June, we're reminded that that is still an obligation to come to Mass every Sunday. So if we miss and we're not sick and we don't have a good reason and we know it's wrong and we do it anyway, that's something to go to confession for, to get God's grace back in our souls. And that's once a year at least, but I try to go actually every week to confession. These practices of our faith, these precepts of the church, are the base level. If we don't practice, we're not on the team. And yet, once we're on the team, we can really thrive in our respective roles. I asked you to follow along with the readings in large part because that second reading is so unique and so challenging. And we've been hearing from Ephesians for a while now. This is the last we'll get of the book of Ephesians. Paul, in a Roman culture, writes to a Roman colony in Ephesus, and he has things about the roles of men and women in a home life, in a family life. And to our ears, it probably sounds anti-woman. It probably sounds like oppressive. But in the original culture, here's what's going on. Women in that day and age were like property. It's really sad, but true. And the husbands just kind of, would go and do their own thing and maybe not be as faithful as they should have been. And so when Paul says to the one role, husbands, love your wives, even to sacrificing your life for them as Christ Jesus sacrificed his life for the church, that's really huge. That's saying, whoa, husbands, you have to stop being jerks to your wives. When he says to the women, be submissive to your husbands, he'll later say, respect your husband. He's saying there is an order here. You're not going to subject yourself to abuse unnecessarily. You're not going to, be a doormat. But at the same time, here's the genius of Paul. He's saying to them and he's saying to us, wives, if you let your husbands take the lead, you're not going to have to go through all the trouble of doing everything. Because let's just face it, men are inclined to laziness. And if women take the lead, the men have no incentive to not be lazy. And so Paul is saying, women, let your men lead. Then there's a leader. It doesn't have to be you. You're not going to have to do everything. And sometimes there's in our society, women can get overburdened. They may feel they have to nag. They have to do everything. The order of the household, if the man leads, then the woman doesn't have to do that. And they're working together in mutual submission. As they are both subordinated to Jesus Christ, they can then have their respective roles. So actually, historically, these readings, the Catholic Church, the teachings, elevated women from this position of like, yeah, you're just like a household object, and we, do with whatever you want. No, this is why Christianity took on. Women were empowered, and they were able to live the gospel. It's beautiful, really. Our roles are really, really important in the faith. And if we're younger, we maybe are very confused about our role in the church, in the world, in our career, all of this. There's not the clearly, you might say, models. I think because for generations, let's just be honest, men have been weak, and therefore there have been a lot of it's anything goes in society. And yet, when we begin to live our roles, it becomes clearer. And not one group is down, the other is up, but no, we all thrive. And there's this mutual benefit that goes on. I really am blessed as a young adult to have met good leaders in the faith who were like assistant coaches to me, and they really trained me to grow in my faith. But if you don't have that, I'll be honest, the Catholic Church feels like a losing team. It feels like really out of touch. And maybe it feels like not worth our time. Feels is the key word, though. We have to get beyond our feelings. We have to see that God is real and he is really here in our midst. And ourselves. We may be the leaders that are lacking in the church, so that others would then be motivated to see that this is not a losing team. This is the only team that gets to heaven. The Catholic Church, the Christian Church, and obviously I'm not saying only Catholics get to heaven, although we are the historic church. We are the path that Jesus has laid out. And so if we were to work together then, each with our respective gifts and goals and in our beautiful roles, we could really begin to win. And this is not just putting people in pews. This is living the faith and living as saints, which is not boring or somehow odd. This is a fully alive humanity where we are joyful and we are engaged and we have something to give because God has given so much to us. And we can give our charity, our care, our service in a non-burnout, in a non-unsustainable sort of a way. But first we have to practice our faith, those first two precepts, coming to Mass every Sunday and Holy Day, coming to confession. If it's been a while, just go. And if you certainly have a grave or mortal sin, please come, even before going to Holy Communion. Coaching, receiving it, giving it, we can do this together. We can be God's team in the world. And then we're going to win, not just kind of get notoriety in the neighborhood, but we will win souls. This is not a game. Eternal life is at stake, heaven or hell. And we can be on the winning team if we practice, if we have good coaching, and we work together.